Hello fellow geeks, it's Neko here with what will be this channel's first theory video. A fair warning though, this will contain spoilers, so if you aren't caught up with House of X and Dawn of X, this is going to spoil some things. But I'll assume if you're still here, you're either caught up or you aren't concerned with spoilers. So let's get to it. Since the rebirth of Scott Summers, or better, the second rebirth of Scott Summers, through the magic of Krakoa and the Five, I've noticed that Scott might have control over his powers now. I say might because this is a theory, of course, but I'll go ahead and explain why it's my current main theory, as well as opt for two other possibilities as well. Issue 4 has just come out, and I think it stood out a bit more for me in regards to Scott maybe being able to control his powers. And I wonder if it caused me to overlook earlier clues in the series. So let's start with X-Men number 1, the kickoff to Dawn of X. Here we find Cyclops and Storm fighting through a facility to free some mutant children who are, presumably, being experimented on, tortured, etc. And while most of these shots look as though he's still reaching up to touch his visor, there is one where he's rolling to ricochet a shot and not touching it, but you could argue that the shots have already gone off and he's just bracing himself. Another shot looks like he may be using it without touching the visor, but the angle makes it very hard to tell. Now, moving on to issue 2, the one where Psyche and his two timeline-displaced offspring take a day trip to another living island. You know, family stuff. We find them fighting the local flowers and fauna here, and initially, he appears to touch his visor when clearing a path for them. But once, they get into, an actual combat, a time or two during the fight, he does, appear to touch the visor. But then, he doesn't seem to need to in what looks like the initial stages of the blast. Curious, isn't it? And then, in issue 3. And all of the X-Men books so far are just Scott finding out about new and potentially dangerous characters / groups that the X-Men and the inhabitants of Krakoa will have to deal with in the future. But anyway, when Gateway takes Scott, Emma, and Sebastian to fight a bunch of octogenarians, it almost seems like he has to activate the visor. Like, he touches it, then his hands are at his side as he, goes to work on the elderly. And this issue might lean a bit harder into a secondary theory of mine, but, again, it looks like he, activates it, and then he no longer has any use to touch the visor after that. And yes, I am aware that some of Scott's visors have had hand triggers, kind of like Spidey shoots his webs with his two, middle fingers. So I know, he doesn't necessarily, have to have changed or anything. I'm aware. But let's move on to number 4, the most recent issue. Now, here we find good old Psyche and, surprisingly, Gorgon as the security detail for Charles, Magneto, and Apocalypse, or whatever his Krakoan name is now. Like these three actually need a security detail. But it's odd that Scott is not wearing any gear, really. And yes, I know the Krakoan clothes and, all that, but he has no visor. And it's soon discovered that there are 2 strike teams waiting to ambush the members of the Quiet Council. So Scott and Gorgon split up to take them out. Now, when Scott engages the strike team, he doesn't seem to have any need to remove his glasses, like at all. He has no need to lift them to get past the ruby quartz lenses, assuming they're made of ruby quartz. He does seem to touch the glasses at one point when spinning around, but this is the only time. You might argue that he flipped them up, but in the final shot, the final shot, because he fires, beams. Never mind. He's clearly firing through the glasses, like his concussive blast is going through the glasses. You can see the bridge of it clearly. Um, and I don't think he has any need to touch them in the shot either. Again, maybe it's an activation thing, or maybe he just doesn't need to anymore. And the times he is touching the visor, and occasionally glasses now, it's just sort of a learned instinct, like, he's about to fire, he reaches up to, do it just because he's done it for so many years now. But who knows? Who knows? Now, for some additional probable, maybe theories, um, because I'm sure the focus being paid to the writing and the art of the X-Men at this point is, above its normal detail, because, this is the big event. This is, the X-Men now. So I'm sure none of this is accidental. We're being shown this. So here's my other theories. I have two. One's a little far-fetched, but this first one I think is highly possible as well. So we have Krakoan technology, right? Um, and maybe Beast or Forge has modified it. Perhaps it's a force thing, like if Scott doesn't exert so much concussive force, it doesn't go through the lenses of his visor or his glasses. As I mentioned earlier, we already know that Krakoan tech makes clothes much less of a problem with its ability to change into whatever it needs to be. So, totally possible we're just dealing with cool new Krakoan technology that, somebody made for Scott. Totally possible. I'm game. That may be what they're trying to make us think. Sure. Secondary theory. Cyclops' mental fortitude, slash maybe possible secondary mutation. Scott has always held his own in mental fencing, sometimes literally mental fencing with opponents. So maybe, who knows? Maybe Emma or Jean or the professor, or maybe all three helped him, overcome his mental issues, or his brain issues. He fell, he whacked his head saving his brother Havoc, when they were kids, and that's why he can't control it. I would argue that that has to have been fixed when they were being reborn, in the great Krakoan tree of life thing, with the five. But yeah, so that's my current working theory. If you don't agree, hey, let me know down in the comments. If you do agree, or think maybe it's that, but maybe with a little twist, hey, drop a line. That's what we're here for. Well, thank you for watching, everyone. Join us again sometime, and hey, let's be geeks together.